Hello, everybody, and welcome to our fourth election podcast from NatWest Markets. I am John Briggs, the head of strategy in the U.S.
And I'm Brian Dangerfield, the head of G10FX strategy here in the U.S.
And I will admit, it's been a little while since our last podcast, but we didn't quite expect the world events to turn as they have and for attention to clearly turn onto more important things. But as we're starting to, I don't even know what the right word is, Brian, is starting to adjust to life as we are now, and markets are starting to calm down, and we're starting to think about the future again as opposed to just how to go from day to day. We thought it would be time to kind of check in, take a pulse, and see where we are when it came to the run to the elections. And I think that, that's exactly where I want to start is with the coronavirus. And I guess the question, that we get the most, even now, is has these local events, these recent events with the coronavirus, is that good for Trump or is it bad for Trump? I mean, I have my opinions. What do you think, Brian?
Well, I think, unfortunately, I think the answer is that it's really a mixed bag. And I think we're going to have to wait until closer to election time to really know for sure. We'll talk in a moment about how President Trump's approval ratings have actually gone up a bit of late. But as we know, President Trump is a president who has sold himself to the American people on his business acumen and for his stewardship of the economy. And as the economy goes, so goes his expectations of winning. And so betting markets have moved against the president. So at the end of February, he was running at close to 60% probability of winning the election on predicted. Now he's down to 49. So the market thinks it's essentially a coin toss. But I think as we assess the economy heading towards the election, if we have a V-shaped recovery, if we're showing signs of really emerging strongly from this crisis heading into the election, President Trump may look like a wartime leader who pulled us through a very difficult moment and something that he really wasn't to blame for with the onset of coronavirus. But if the economy is still sputtering along and, we have issues with the rollout of the kind of reopening of the economy, there could be some more room for second guessing and individuals, particularly independents, looking for someone else to lead the economy and to lead the country.
So I think you hit on what's most important for me, and that's the exit strategy. I mean, this is understandably, and I'm very sympathetic to any leader, governor, CEO, and the president trying to figure this out. If you exit too soon and the virus comes back and you have to reinstate lockdowns, the public's not going to be happy with that. I mean, notwithstanding even the economic impact of having a second series of lockdowns. But if you keep things locked down for a long time, which might be the best medical necessity, you could further deepen the damage in the economy, see more small businesses closing, and then create, a difficult path to escape. You don't get the escape velocity you might have, and that's more of a U or even an L-shaped recovery, as opposed to the V we're all hoping for. So there's risks on both sides. So I think that how we manage the exit here, how he manages it, and it's one thing, he doesn't have as much power as say the governors do, as we've seen in these lockdowns, but the message from the top is going to resonate, I think, with people as to him encouraging openings, them happening, and does that happen effectively. So I really think the next couple of months on how the nation exits the lockdowns or reopens, and whether that's successful, for me, is going to be the key as to whether he can claim success come the fall debates or not. But you mentioned his poll numbers. Now, why is that? I mean, this is a crisis, but I would say that some of the responses have been relatively uneven at best out of the administration. Why do you think the poll numbers have been doing better for him?
Well, I think, there is what we call a rally around the flag effect, which is when you have periods of national crisis, the national unity kind of pulls the polling numbers higher for whoever happens to be in power. So you've seen that with President Bush around 9/11. You saw that with President Obama around the mission that took out Osama bin Laden, and now you're seeing it with President Trump. He's running at approval ratings that are close to the highs of his presidency. But one of the things that's interesting about President Trump is that throughout his, coming up on 4 years in office, his approval rating has been remarkably stable at around 40 to 45% on average. He's closer to the top end of that range now, but I think it's probably fair to say the boost from the rally around the flag effect was maybe a little bit less than he might have hoped for. But it's also something that could keep his poll numbers a little bit more sticky as we look ahead. if there are problems with the economy heading into the election, if voters, I should say, start to look at Trump a bit more skeptically because of how the economy performs and look a little bit more skeptically at his record in dealing with the virus. He has had a fairly sticky approval rating on the downside as well, and so it may also be subject to more limited downside. So certainly notable that the president's enjoying a boost in his ratings. These tend to not be something that's lasting. These effects don't tend to last. But again, I think it's going to come down to how the economy recovers and how quickly it recovers. I think President Trump could come out of this looking quite well if the economy follows suit. But I think if we're still mired in economic turmoil a couple months down the road, that's probably going to lead to more questioning of the president's record and how he's handled this crisis.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion, and I think that, when you look at the flip side, when you say, all right, well, that's the issue for Trump, how does the events, is it helpful for Biden? Is it helpful for, the Democratic side of the ticket? Again, it's a lot of it is on how Trump performs, and we get that. But, separately, is the Democratic, does this lend towards, Democratic priorities? Is Biden kind of the right guy? Is he the one that's going to be seen to lead out of it? Taking the other side of the coin. And, Democrats tend to have had, at least I would say in the last few years, given early attacks on Obamacare and such, probably have, in my mind, an edge on the healthcare discussion. Now, that said, I'm not sure that, people would look at Biden at a time where we really need to have a strong economic recovery. Let's assume we have a relatively decent V shape into the fall and there's widespread testing. And yes, the coronavirus perhaps comes back, but it's not an inhibitor in daily life like it is now. Are people going to look between Biden and Trump and say, I think Biden's the right guy to fix the economy? I don't see that as his strength. I do think they'll try to make it, more of a health care and, protect the blue-collar worker and how do we help raise people up type argument. But I do think that that's a bit of a risk on the Democratic side, and I think this is interesting because Sanders dropped out in being in the race, so it's pretty much all Biden from here. I mean, we've heard some discussions about Cuomo, and I know that you and I are on the same page on this, that this is kind of the passing fad, and how media gets all over Warren, and then it was all Bloomberg, and now it's this speculation that Cuomo could take a brokered convention. I mean, I just don't see Biden trailing, I don't see Cuomo being able to get enough delegates to really make a difference. And these other scenarios about him being forced out by the Democratic leadership is just, nonsensical to me. So I think it is going to be Biden. I'm not sure whether, he's seen as the right person at the right time. I mean, it's a long time away, so a lot of things can happen. But I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think we mentioned that coronavirus has changed American life really forever, and it's happened at a time when we normally would be very focused on the U.S. election. But right now, this is the time when the former Vice President Joe Biden should be cementing himself as the leader of the Democratic Party and should be pushing his message to the American people. Instead, he, like all other Americans, are on lockdown. He's not traveling the country campaigning. He's not able to get his message out there. And, you mentioned Andrew Cuomo. Right now, the people on the front lines dealing with coronavirus are President Trump and the Trump task force on the Republican side, and the coronavirus task force on the Republican side. And then on the Democratic side, it's a combination of House and Senate leaders who are currently in the House and Senate, and also governors, in particular Andrew Cuomo in New York and others. And so from the Democratic side, who is the voice who is uniting the Democratic Party? It really should be Biden at this point, that he is mounting a campaign to run for president and will likely win a majority of delegates. He's really running unopposed at this point. But he's lacking that momentum that he should be getting. He really should be snowballing Super Tuesday into an opportunity to really unite the party behind his message. As you mentioned, that message would probably be a healthcare-focused one focused on, worker benefits and, supporting social safety nets, which are things that have happened, as part of the coronavirus response. But Biden right now doesn't feel like he's the leader of the Democratic Party. It's just difficult for him to be able to send his message when the entire world is fully focused on something unrelated to the economy. Now, there's going to be a lot of time, there's a lot of time for that to change, but these are important times for Biden to sort of throw himself into the national debate and say, hey, I'm here and I'm running to become president. I will be the nominee for the Democratic Party. But it's just going to be difficult for him to get his foothold into the debate when the focus is really elsewhere. So the economic consequences of this could end up helping Vice President Biden. He may have a problem right now in that the momentum he should be getting as the election approaches has really been robbed by the fact that we're all so focused, and perhaps rightly so, on coronavirus.
So what's his strategy there then? I mean, does he just kind of sit back and talk about a couple high-level points that he would do and just see what happens with Trump? Or does he come out with a strategy of his own that he, a more detailed one? Meaning, if he sits back and he gets the ability to just, see if Trump kind of screws this up and, criticize it, or does he try to show that kind of that strong leadership and put a platform of his own out there, which then actually itself can be problematic? I'm not sure how he gets the attention here. Given all the focus on the virus, and as you said, on Cuomo and Trump. I guess we'll find out.
He really has to walk a tightrope here because he really should be leading the charge in terms of working with House Democrats and House and Senate Democrats on coordinating Democratic response. Like I said, when you become the nominee for president, you effectively become the most important person in your party. And Biden has to become that person. It can't be Pelosi. It can't be Chuck Schumer, the head of the Senate Democrats. And it certainly can't be Andrew Cuomo if they want to be successful in November. So I think it's a combination of, in the U.S. here, for our international listeners, you may not be familiar with the phrase Monday morning quarterback. But essentially the day after the football game, it's the person sitting on their couch saying, oh, I would have done this, I would have done that. That could be part of Biden's strategy, basically criticizing Trump from the sidelines. But part of being a leader is being on the front lines. And whether or not Trump is successful in that, he is certainly on the front lines. And I think that's something that could end up lending him support down the line, depending on how the economy comes out of this.
All right. Well, let's wrap up with our usual focus, which is market impact. I mean, for me, it's hard to see the market particularly caring for a little while on this. We do get an occasional, question and, I'm actually surprised by the amount of questions we get about what does this mean in the elections for Trump, because it is still such a binary outcome out there. I still think that no matter what happens, the approach to business, the approach to the economy, among many other things, is going to be quite different under a Biden than a Trump. So it is still factoring into a lot of people's minds in the economic sphere. So when do you think that we're actually going to kind of turn back to politics rather than just saying, oh, is approval ratings up or down a couple points? I'm surprised, I'm not surprised. Or when do we think that this is going to become a greater focus?
So I think because of the economy, it's been forced, because of the dynamics of coronavirus and the economy, the discussion about the election and the impact on the market probably gets biased later, as in closer to the election, because even in July and August, we might be having the same conversation we are now, which is the economy might bounce back in a very serious way. I mean, there's certainly the possibility that, when we get out of this, there is a really meaningful economic surge. And if that's, for President Trump and for Vice President Biden, if that happens in October versus it happening in December is an absolutely massive development for global markets. And, we could be having the same discussion 3 or 4 months from now with this same sense of, a frustrating uncertainty that the reality is the path of the economy, which is very uncertain, both in timing and shape of the recovery, is going to matter. But I think it's probably fair to say that the overall picture of Trump being generally positive for U.S. assets because he is a pro-business president and, relative to Biden, that's probably still the right way to look at it from the 30,000-foot perspective. At the same time, you also have had the fact that the progressive candidates are not at the top of the ticket. I think relatively speaking, that means the range of outcomes is a little bit less extreme. So as you mentioned, Vice President Biden does have in his platform, he does have tax increases on corporations, and he would certainly be more pro-regulatory in stance than the president. And over time, the Biden is likely going to have to be pulled a little bit to the left in order to shore up the Democratic base in some ways. And so I think that overall market impact that President Trump on the margin better for business and U.S. assets, more positive for equity markets, for example, relative to Biden, I think that's still in place. But a lot of it is going to depend on where we are in sort of the weeks leading up to the election.
All right. Well, you said we could be asking the same questions in 3 to 4 months. If there's one thing I've learned about 2020 is that the ground changes very quickly. So I'm sure that you and I are going to be back on this podcast very soon about something we didn't quite expect. So thanks, everyone. We'll check in with you soon, and stay healthy and safe. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.